Let me start the second session, welcoming back the audience on this session on visualization. In the last session, we had focused on the three-step process. Having a message is important. Once we have the message loud and clear, the form of visualization becomes important, and how do you design that form was what was discussed in the last session. Let us take examples of these three parts of the visualization process in this session, starting with defining the message. As we have said, message is the most important starting point. Unless the message is not clear, how are you going to design the visualization for that data? So why do you think message is important, Anand?
So again, right, end of the day, what is the purpose, right? We don't sit here and create graph charts for fun, correct? We do it for a reason. Now, a simple example, right? So and on the right, what you see is a tabular, this one where we have shown the number of people at various age buckets and number of age cases, right? So now what is it that you want to show, correct? Now, my display will be this one, right? If I look at this, I can look at several things that messages that I might want to communicate with the same data. Correct? I might want to come back and say between 35 to 39, that is the single largest age bucket that we have age cases, right? And you can see that in the data, right? Or I might come back and say, oh, you know what, between 30 to 39, that represents the two largest buckets, right? That's quite a lot.
Right?
Now, but I might also want to come back and say, do you know what? There are close to 7,000 cases of children under 5. Right? Now, to me, depending on my objective, that might be what I want to emphasize. Do you realize that there are kids under 5, no fault of theirs, right? And there are 7,000. And if you want to say, take it up to 12 years old, there's 10,000 children under the age of 12, right, who are suffering from AIDS. Right? And these are children who have contracted AIDS for no fault of theirs, correct? So in some ways, I might be looking to emphasize that, correct? In some cases, I might be emphasizing just statistically that this is the most at-risk group, right? In the 25 to 39 range, whatever it may be. So depending on what and that's the message, right? What do I want to communicate here? And accordingly, you will construct the display. Correct?
Correct. So now the message is, once the message is understood, choosing a form becomes apparent. Yes.
Right. And so, for instance, if I were to look at it, the thing that I will show is the one on the right side, right? Which is a very simple columnar display, because it tells you very clearly where the peak is. Correct? The second thing is also the point I emphasized about using a line graph for categorical data. It doesn't. So now you see that the data is categorical. You binned it, so it doesn't make sense to make a line graph. Correct. So here this is what I want to show. Correct. So and that's what I meant by saying once I get the data and I communicate this, then the form becomes very self-evident, correct? Because it's a combination of the message, the type of data, correct? And when you put those two together, it's very self-evident that what type of display you want to choose, right? And then, of course, have I applied all the principles that I spoke about? No, but because we are building up those principles. For instance, I have not annotated the data here. There are things like that, but this is done to illustrate the point, correct? And in fact, there are a few other things that I will talk about, like for instance, even in this display, correct? If you look at the age buckets, correct? I'm not a big fan of those vertical spacing. Vertical as well. I mean, because what do you expect me to do? Lie down every time I have to read this graph, tilt back or tilt the laptop up and down. And in fact, it makes it worse if it's on a mobile device. When I tilt it, it auto rotates. So that doesn't help me either. So, so there are other, and that we'll come in to address those points when we talk about the design elements.
Yes.
Right?
So there are obviously some recommended best practices when we choose a form, right?
Yeah. Right. So one of the things, again, see, look at this way, right? I have sales numbers for 2 years, Jan to December, for 2 years. Now, the message I want to show is that, there doesn't seem to be any kind of a seasonality.
Yeah.
Right. That's the message I want to show. Correct. And, the secondary message might be that, the trend is all wrong. In 2004, the trend is not right. Correct. Now, if I throw it in a tabular display like this, that message just doesn't come across. I mean, if I show the table, it is impossible to show that, maybe at some level a trend might be visible, but if my message is to show that there's no seasonality, right? The tabular display doesn't show it to me.
Doesn't help, yes.
Correct? But when I show it as a graphical display like this, right? The lack of seasonality shows up very clearly that there's no seasonality. Correct? The trend is somewhat visible in the tabular display. Correct? But it takes some effort. Correct? 2004 trend is probably a little bit more evident than the 2003 trend. Correct? Because if you look at 2004, if you scan top to bottom, you can see it's monotonically reducing.
Yeah.
2003 is not that way, right? So it kind of goes up, goes down, and then if you look towards the end, it flattens out. So it's not, so the trend is not very clearly evident in the 2003 data.
Yeah.
Right? So again, if I want to show that there's no seasonality, very clearly the right display is the way. Even for trend, right is preferred, because if one goes and looks at how many seconds it took for you to understand that 2004 there's a downward trend, 2003 was an upward trend, by looking at the right graph and looking at the left table, then you will understand what I mean by saying the form is, how the whole idea being, how do you communicate that quickly, correct? Without any loss in transmission.
Correct. But I mean, are there some general rules about when to use table and when to use a chart? There are some general rules, right?
There are, correct? So for instance, right, when you want to display a complete data set, now it may not be practical, but if you want to show this one, where we are just showing the data, we may not necessarily be inferring something from that, correct? Or I might see, especially if you're looking at customer surveys, NPS scores, you might just want to show the kind of complete data in a table, right? You might want to show, if you want to highlight a specific row, correct? If you want to show like all the product categories and you just want to show the, I want to factually tell you what is the sales of every product category, correct? I am not trying to tell you that A is bigger than B or B is bigger than C. I'm just trying to factually communicate that, you know what, by state, these are my sales numbers.
Yeah.
Correct? I'm not trying to tell you that Tamil Nadu did more sales in Karnataka, which did more sales in Maharashtra. Correct? I'm just trying to tell you that Tamil Nadu hit 20 million in sales and Karnataka did 24 million in sales. Tabular display. Correct?
Okay.
Or if you want to just say, look, focus here, focus there, right? You can highlight a certain row. Again, emphasis, right? Now, sometimes you will want to show how the numbers were calculated. So you might say, look, the way it was calculated was revenue, cost, margins, and EBITDA. Correct? So sometimes when you show that, it might be easier to show it in a tabular display where you can see how it is calculated. Correct? And it happens often, right? You'll just say revenues, costs, margins, or what you call RUM metrics, right? We'll call it RUM metrics, revenue, units, and margins. Correct? Which helps this one. Chart will come exactly like when you want to show patterns, we want to show a change over time, show some cause and effect. Occasionally, you have to be very careful about that. I want to compare two things. Comparison is probably the most common use case for charts. And a pattern. I mean, essentially, a pattern is effectively a meta comparison, right? Comparison, I can compare two things. When I show that same comparison across multiple objects, it shows a pattern, correct? Or multiple And when you show that over time, it becomes a time series. So at some level, these are all kind of specific instances of the same concept. So visual comparison. So data tables are used for two things, right? One is just factually communicating the numbers without drawing inferences. Right? I want to show specific items where I'll show this and highlight one. Correct? And if you want to show visibility into the calculations, okay, you know what, A, B, C, this is how the margins stack up, etc., so that you can compare multiple things together, right? And sometimes, just if you have equal enough, you have wide number of columns and a whole number of rows, a graphical chart display might become overly complicated.
Yeah,
in which case, the simplicity mandates that you just show it as a table.
Yeah.
And that is also important. So for instance, if I have 20, let's say I have sales, I have something and I want to show by state, but then I also want to show units sold, revenue made, margins made, percentage margin, what is the profit, how many sales agents were there, how many outlets were there, and if I want to show 20 different metrics for those, trying to show that in one graph will be impossible. So in which case, you are better off showing it as a tabular display, then going out and taking out individual metrics and showing graphs to show some comparisons.
Correct. Understood. So there are some quick tips about when to use table and when to use chart, right? That's what we were talking about just now. So when you are, as you are saying, when you have just highlighting on one component.
Correct. So if I have multiple things and I just want to highlight one component of pie chart, now I'm going to put a huge rider on pie charts, right? In fact, while I say this, I generally also say friends don't let friends use pie charts. Correct? Pie charts are very, very difficult to interpret and probably the most grossly misinterpreted types of charts that you will see there.
Why do you say that?
So, okay. The problem with pie charts is, see, when I want to show that one is such largely dominant over the others, a pie chart might be okay. But take a look at the pie chart that I've shown there, right? If you look at the blue, light blue and the dark blue, can you tell me which is bigger and by how much?
Difficult, no? Little difficult, yes.
That is exactly the reason why pie charts are so perceptually, right? Remember what I said about we are very good at perceiving differences in length and relative differences in length, correct? We are not very good at perceiving relative differences in area, especially if the shapes are different.
Yeah.
So if I draw a rectangle and a square, correct? And I tell you which covers a bigger and a circle, and I ask you to tell me which of these covers a bigger surface area.
Difficult,
right?
Very difficult.
Very, very difficult. And really, with a pie chart, that is what you're asking people to do. You're asking them to compare two different areas of slightly different shape and trying to determine which has a higher area. Correct?
Yeah.
The same pie chart could be equivalently shown as a column chart.
Yeah. Okay, correct.
And the message comes across very clearly. So now my question is, why would you choose a pie chart? Correct?
Then why?
Now, if the emphasis is to show the percentage breakdown, where it all adds up to 100%, there you can make an argument for saying pie chart. Correct?
Okay.
But then even there, if you have two of them that are very, very comparable, correct? You cannot make out the distinction area wise unless you annotate it.
Exactly. I was going to say, annotation might help there.
Correct. So that's why I said, so pie charts to me is a chart of last resort, right? Which is why I say, right, friends don't let friends use pie charts. So that's a very important one, right? And similarly, if you want to show components of multiple items, you use a stacked column chart or something like that. Now, if you look at actually an individual column of the stacked column chart, right? That could be a pie chart, effectively.
Yes.
Right? So you could take a pie chart and make it a simple column chart or a single column of stacked components. Again, perceptually, which is easier to understand.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
But here in a column chart also, comparing two orange regions and deciding which one is bigger might end up becoming difficult.
Correct. So and that is where you will also look at your choice of what are the categories on the x-axis and what are the categories that are on the stacked columns. Correct. Also makes a difference. Correct.
Yes.
Yes. So, and in fact, if you notice the those guidelines that I've drawn on those between the orange, that is precisely to address your point, because you can easily see. Remember when we spoke about the components of perception, where we spoke about thickness, length, orientation.
Yes.
You would actually see basis the orientation whether it is getting thinner or thicker.
Yes. Yes.
Correct. So a simple line that draws these will actually show you whether the orange component is reducing in contribution.
Yes. Correct.
Correct. So here you will very clearly see from the second column to the third column. Correct. Orange has held its own. Blue has increased primarily at the expense of pink.
Yes. Yes.
Correct. Whereas
that is very clear from those lines that you have drawn.
And between the first and the second one, it's very clear that blue has gained percentage at the expense of orange.
At the expense of orange, yes, yes.
Correct. Very simple lines kind of addresses those things. Yeah,
that helps.
Small things like that, right? Now, and look, I mean, instead of not getting through individual this ones, but remember when I spoke about once you get the message, the form is very evident. That's the whole point. If your message stresses this, it's very evident that you. So if your message is stressing correlation, right, you will do a scatter plot.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If your message is talking about change over time, you will do a line chart.
You will do a line chart. Yes.
So and that's what I meant by saying, when you get a half volley outside the off stump, you're not going to try and do a hook shot.
True.
So to me, this is just a quick reckoner. No hard and fast rule, but broadly speaking, that's how you think about it.
Correct. And here are some examples for that, right? So for example, if you want to say sales of A bigger than sales of B,
exactly.
Very easily done.
So again, this is one more thing where people might show it as a pie chart.
Yeah.
Correct? That doesn't clearly come across that, A exceeds C by almost 2x.
Yes.
Whereas here it does come across.
Yes. Once again, the principle that the height is easily perceptible than the area.
Yes, that is so critical. That is so critical. Correct?
Yes.
So very simple. Correct?
Right.
Now go to the next one, right? If my message is that there is no apparent relationship between, and there's no correlation, correct?
Right.
Simple scatter plot with a regression line tells you that effectively there is no correlation.
Correct.
Right?
But a pie chart does have its place, right? For example, if you want to show the contribution.
Yes, correct. So that's why I said, but notice this, that I have taken the trouble to annotate it very carefully.
Yes.
And that is critical. That is critical. Correct? Without annotation, right? Honestly speaking, will we able to tell between C and B what is their relative strength? You can't.
Difficult, yeah, very difficult.
Correct? So when you use, if you do have to use a pie chart, or if you do choose to use a pie chart, correct? Make sure that annotations are there.
Correct.
But also remember this, right? The message here is that the competitor A has the competitor D has the smallest share. Correct?
Yeah.
That pie chart is okay. If I want to do a comparison between A, B, C, and D and show the relative strengths, pie chart may not be appropriate.
So it may not, yeah.
So the message is that guy is the smallest guy.
Mm-hmm.
No problem. But if you want to come back and say, if you combine D and C, they have the same market share as B.
Yeah.
Okay, this will fail miserably.
True. And time series has always been classic. So
Yes.
over a period of time.
Correct. And just again, very clearly, I just want to show that, look, we have a problem. EPS has been steadily declining. It's time for a new CEO. Basically, that's what this is saying. Correct. But I mean, you can say all that if you just say, look, EPS has been declining, the CEO has got to go, right? You are a troublemaker. You show this graph, then everybody says, you know what, you're not a troublemaker, you're a whistleblower, right?
Yeah. And the last one is essentially an example of a box plot, right? Where clearly those dots, 214 observation number, 213 observation number, clearly shows that those are outside the tail and probably they represent the outliers in the data.
Exactly, right? So you can talk of, I mean, I cannot emphasize enough the concept of these outliers, right? Because as you enter the workforce, right, the biggest thing you will see is that people will pick up an outlier and make a whole case as if that is a regular event.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and they will call it, oh, I have anecdotal information. I mean, that's the buzzword, right? And this is what they teach you at all the MBA schools. Okay? Anecdotal information. Right?
Yeah.
Draw me a box plot and show me where it sticks. And if your anecdote sits within the big yellow bar, I'll talk. If it is sitting in that thing, I don't need to talk to you about that.
Exactly.
Correct? Exactly. So it's very, very critical, right? I mean, just to show that, hey, you know what, this is what it is. So because they'll come back and say, I spoke to this one customer and this one customer had this kind of a feedback. And hence we should change our entire product line. Are you bonkers?
Right? Yeah.
If that were the case, right? Because when I talk to my daughter, I will have to rebuild the entire Akasa Air model and introduce business class seating.
Very nice example. Very nice.
Because she just looked at it and said, oh, no business class on these flights. So, and if I take that one example, correct? Without understanding where it sits on the outlier chart, then I will have a whole fleet of business class jets.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, no, that's not going to make too much money in India.
Probably, yeah. Yes.
So on that front, Rahul, I think I've eliminated the probability. We are very, very clear. That's not the way to go in the Indian aviation market.
Yeah. And the data clearly shows that, right? So,
yes.
All right. Okay, so we have knocked down 2 out of the 3 components of the process of designing the visualization for a particular data type. First, we discussed about importance of messaging, and then we spoke about various forms that immediately come from the message, right? So we still have to discuss the designing the form, but let us do that in the next session. So let us end the session here, having knocked down 2 out of the 3 components of the design of visualization process. So let's end the second session here.